It is difficult to imagine the Philippine educational landscape without the private schools. The private schools help the state fulfill its mandate of making quality education accessible to all Filipinos. It is in recognition of this role that the Fund for Assistance to Private Education, a permanent trust fund for private education, was established through Executive Order 156 on November 5, 1968. The Private Education Assistance Committee, or the PEAC, was created as the trustee of the fund. The PEAC is composed of the Secretary of Education as the ex officio chair and a representative each from the National Economic Development Authority, Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines, Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities, and Association of Christian Schools, Colleges, and Universities. For the development of private education, the PEAC takes on the role of funder, advocate, partner, and enabler. A national secretariat headed by an executive director executes the policies, programs, and initiatives of the PEAC for private education. In 1989, a landmark piece of legislation, RA 6728, or the Government Assistance to Students and Teachers in Private Education, or GAITF, was passed. The GAITF Act, which was amended by RA 8545 in 1998, institutionalized government assistance to private education in the country. The Educational Service Contracting, or ESC, Teacher Salary Subsidy, or TSS, Senior High School Voucher Program, the In-Service Training, or INSET, and research are part of the Department of Education's GAITF program. The PEAC implements the GAITF program given the track record of the PEAC in program management. The PEAC has been involved in the development of the ESC, from piloting a scheme, which was a precursor to the ESC in 1982 to 1986, to implementing the ESC in 1986 to 1991, and from 1996 up to the present. The ESC today has close to 1 million beneficiaries. Part of the PEAC infrastructure for the GAITF program is the Regional Secretariat. The PEAC-RS is headed by the Regional Program Director, who designates a Regional Program Coordinator for the day-to-day program implementation in the region. The PEAC has the following responsibilities in the GAITF program: orientation, ESC certification, SHS voucher applications, processing, monitoring, resolving cases of schools with adverse findings, regular meetings and consultations with stakeholders, research and data gathering, in-service training. The PEAC is also accredited as a local continuing professional development, or CPD, provider by the Professional Regulation Commission, or PRC. Participants of the INSET programs offered by the PEAC have the opportunity to earn the required CPD units for the renewal of their professional licenses. From 2012 to 2017, the PEAC trained a total of more than 70,000 junior high school teachers, and since 2016, an estimated 17,000 SHS teachers. The PEAC also implements its own programs of assistance. The Assistance to Programs and Initiatives to Reform Education, or ASPIRE, gave funding support in the amount of 33.7 million to 99 projects of private educational associations since 2015 to 2016. The Research for School Improvement Towards Excellence has assisted 79 private school administrators and teachers writing their theses and dissertation since 2015 to 2016. The Dissemination Assistance to Research and Education, or DARE, has supported 16 faculty members who presented their papers in international conferences abroad since it was launched in 2016 to 2017. The Philippine Education Research Journal is an online resource for decision makers, policymakers, and practitioners in education. Its editorial board consists of highly respected educators and researchers. The Philippine Education Conference is an opportunity for school administrators and teachers to learn from educational leaders and experts here and abroad as they discuss educational issues, concerns, trends, and innovations. Recognizing the inherent strengths of the private schools in achieving excellence in Philippine education, the PEAC is committed to promoting private education as an integral part of our educational system.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Maydi Malanta, the Trainee and Development Associate of the PEAC National Secretariat. Welcome to this morning's webinar for music on streamlining the K-12 curriculum, an approach to determining which standards and competencies to teach. This program is part of the pre-opening activities and interventions of the PEAC to assist private schools in their recovery and readiness of operations for school year 2020-2021 amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Our speaker this morning is a graduate of Bachelor of Music from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and has a diploma in Creative Performing Musical Arts from the same school. Currently, she is finishing her postgraduate studies at the College of Music at St. Scholastica's College, Manila. She was a former curriculum development consultant and writer of the Department of Education. At present, she teaches grades 5 to 10 music at Miriam College, Nuvali. And now present to you our speaker for this morning, Ms. Josefina Concepcion, M. Lector. Good morning, Ma'am Joy.
Good morning, Miss Mai. Good morning, teachers. Kumusta po kayo? I'm sure you are very busy preparing for the coming school year, and I hope you are excited as we are. Let's just wait po for my presentation, okay? I hope you have had your breakfast, and let's do this together po. Ano po? Good morning, everyone, and again, welcome to PEAC's webinar entitled Streamlining the K-12 Curriculum, an Approach to Determining Which K-12 Standards and Competencies to Teach. But before we get down to business, please take note of the following. We encourage you to take notes during the duration of the webinar. And if you have questions, it will be entertained after the talk. And for the handout of this webinar, the link will be available after the webinar. And finally, please view the slide presentation of the speaker in full screen on your devices to better appreciate the content. So, are you ready now, teachers? Let's dive in. After being locked down inside our homes for the last 2 months, the question in most of teachers' mind is, how will schools now in the new normal be able to cover the K-12 curriculum? I'm sure you have asked that yourselves many times over the last 2 weeks. This question will be our focus question for our webinar this morning. Now, here are our objectives to help us have a clearer view of what you can expect for this 2-hour webinar. First, together we will discuss the rationale and parts of the DepEdMELC's curriculum guide for school year 2020-2021. Then, explain the process of streamlining K-12 standards and competencies, and relate the importance of alignment in streamlining with the PEAC recertification. And finally, apply the process to selected units of study in a subject area for curriculum mapping, identification of instructional materials, and preparation of the unit calendar. Nowadays, the IITF has been our guide for our daily life. With regards to the opening of the school year, the agency has laid out the following guidelines for the opening of the school year. First and foremost, Private schools must have the approval of the IATF to operate. And second, there will be no face-to-face interaction with the students. And as far as DepEd is concerned, private schools must comply with the following directives. First, the compliance of the minimum health standards set by the important departments of our government. Second, the submission of the LCP, that is the Learning Continuity Plan, which includes the school curriculum, and finally, the submission of our school calendar. Now, for schools applying for recertification this year, these are the important dates to take note of. This year, PEAC will be employing e-recertification because of our current situation. Submission of requirements will be on September 1, 2020, and the second part will be on September 30, 2020. The schedule of e-recertifications will be from November 2020 to March 2021. In preparation for the e-recertification of ESC participating schools, these schools will need to prepare the following. First, the PEAC School Recovery and Readiness Plan, which is in line with the DepEd's LCP. Second, the PEAC School Recovery and Readiness Assessment Tool results, along with the PEAC Certification Assessment Instrument, self-ratings, and evidences for compliance. All of this will be submitted online for the viewing of the certifiers. So how do we go about this? In terms of the school curriculum document, which is part of both the DepEd LCP and the PEAC recertification, the question is, how will ESC schools in 2020-2021 prepare the curriculum? Now, based on the diagram on your screen, the school curriculum will have to be submitted twice. One for DepEd and the second one is at PEAC for its recertification. So how should a curriculum map look like? This is an example of a basic format of a curriculum map. We call this the diary curriculum map, and it includes the following: the term or quarter, the unit topic, the content and performance standard, the competencies or skills, the assessment, the activities, the resources, and the institutional core values. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. You have done this one way or the other. For those of you who have seen a curriculum map for the first time, welcome to our fold. So our question here is, how can ESC schools prepare a curriculum map that covers the K-12 standard and competencies in the new normal and meets recertification requirements? Given our current health crisis that has changed our life immensely, schools have been greatly affected, and we are now faced with these new normals as educators. We are now faced with a shortened school calendar. We as teachers, we are preparing and we will be delivering and teaching our lessons in varied instructional modalities. There will be limited face-to-face contact with the student if ever that happens. And should that happen, schools will be allowed to have students in the classroom. The size will significantly be reduced, as well as the class time. And finally, because of the pandemic that we are experiencing right now, we should expect that there will be frequent disruptions due to outbreaks depending on the place where the outbreaks will be affected. So given these conditions, teaching mode will be greatly affected. So how are we going to create the curriculum given the limited amount of time or the regular number of days that we used to have before the public health crisis? In order to prepare the curriculum for school year 2020-2021, we need to consider three things. First, the existing 2016 curriculum guide. I hope you have a copy of that. And then, of course, the newly published DepEd MELCS or Most Essential Learning Competency Matrix. I hope you also have that with you today. And finally, because we are undergoing e-recertification, we need to consider the standards of compliance in the PEAC certification of instruments. Let us take a look at the three sources. We are already familiar with the 2016 curriculum guide, and I'm sure you have come across the recently published MELCS. And more importantly, the question at hand is, will the MELCS replace the existing curriculum guide? Well, according to the briefer of the MELCS, releasing the MELCS does not downplay the standards set by the K-12 curriculum guides. Rather, this serves as a guide to teachers as they address the instructional needs of the learners while ensuring that curriculum standards are maintained and achieved. Therefore, the MELCS does not replace the existing curriculum guide prescribed by the DepEd. In fact, if we read the briefers in detail and in particular subjects, there are certain things that need to be emphasized. For example, in the Filipino briefer, it states, tandaan ang layunin ng pagbuo ng MELCS ay hindi upang palitan ang kasalukuyang curriculum guide, kundi upang magabayan ang mga guro sa pagtukoy ng mga kompetensing mas kinakailangan ng mga mag-aaralan sa taong panuruang 2020-2021. Sa huli, hinihikayat pa rin ang mga guro na sumangguni sa curriculum guide ng Filipino kung sa tingin nilang hindi sapat ang kompetensing tinukoy sa MELCS. So the use of the MELCS, my dear teachers, is not prescriptive. And as stated in one briefer, it is suggestive. Therefore, we may still use the existing curriculum guide or we may look at the MELCS for guidance. But we need to take extra care in utilizing the MELCS. Keep in mind that the creation of the MELCS is due to our current situation. Thus, it is a temporary arrangement, my dear teachers. This is temporary. Therefore, when referring to the MELCS, we as educators and designers must bear in mind the return to the full use of the curriculum guide once we go back to the new normal. So we need to balance what we get from the 2016 curriculum guide and the one that we will be using from the MELCS. The third source that we need to look at in the presentation or preparation of the curriculum map is the PEAC Certification Assessment Instrument. As flashed on the screen, we have the standards for compliance for the area of the curriculum assessment and instruction. And we have here the expectations regarding what a school should have in their own curriculum map. Now, if you will notice, there are certain requirements here that are just a reiteration of the guidelines from the DepEd stated in the standards of compliance. So to go back to our focus question for today, how can ESC schools prepare a curriculum map that covers the K-12 standards and competencies in the new normal and meets recertification requirements? Teachers, the answer is we prepare first the DepEd curriculum guide and or in tandem with the MELCs, and we are also guided in our preparations by the PEAC certification assessment instruments. These are the three sources or references that we need to keep in mind as we prepare the curriculum map. Now, are you ready to take a closer look at the curriculum map? Take a deep breath, teachers, and here we go. Every curriculum map begins with a term, or in certain schools, we refer to this as quarters. So that will depend on what your school uses. This is followed by the unit topic content. Succeedingly, it is followed by the two most important standards that I am hoping you know this by heart by now: content standards and performance standards. The standards are lifted from the curriculum guide along with the unit topic content. Now, the standards will be followed by the competencies or skills, which is again taken from the curriculum guide or the MELCs for this year. The next three columns, assessment, activities, and resources, are provided by the teacher. Now, just to be clear, my dear teachers, neither the curriculum guide nor the MELCs provide any input on the aforementioned three columns: assessment, activities, and resources. This will have to be prepared by us, teachers. And finally, the institutional core values is based on the school's vision and mission. In the succeeding part of this webinar, we are going to do a walkthrough of these different parts of the curriculum map. Keep in mind too that as we complete the different parts of the curriculum map, the certification assessment instrument is always looking for the alignment of the different parts, and it is therefore important to make sure that the columns are not just filled up. Don't just copy it for the sake of copying, but rather each of these columns are aligned with one another from left to right of the table. There should be a relationship among the different columns in the curriculum map. So if we go back now to the PEAC certification assessment instrument, we will constantly see the word alignment. For example, a curriculum map in each subject area that is aligned with the philosophy, vision, mission, goals, and objectives of the school. A curriculum map is aligned with the K-12 curriculum guides, standards, and competencies. A curriculum map that shows horizontal alignment between standards, competencies, assessment, instruction, and resources in all the learning units. And finally, a curriculum map articulates vertical learning progression across the different levels. So the word alignment will have to be worn on our sleeves all the time, teachers. Never forget alignment, alignment, alignment. So let us now take part by part the components of the curriculum map. Let's focus on the first unit, on the unit topic, the content standards, and the performance standard. This part of the curriculum map are taken and copied. Again, let me reiterate that. This part of the curriculum map are taken or copied from the curriculum guide. Now, just a quick review, teachers. It is stated in the K-12 Basic Education Curriculum Guide, as well as in the MELCs, that the curriculum is standards-based. Even if the title of the document is Most Essential Learning Competencies, we need to remember that these most essential learning competencies are still based on standards. They are anchored on standards. And it is important to remember that the content and performance standards are directly lifted from the curriculum guides. So the MELCS does not show any rephrasing of the content and performance standard. It is directly taken from the existing curriculum guide. I hope that is clear, my dear teachers. Now, when we move on to the competencies or skills, this part may take some time since there are so many things to consider. The competencies may be lifted from the 2016 curriculum guide together with the MELCS, and we may either use both guides or just one of the guides, depending on the situation or the need for the quarter. So it is very important, my dear teachers, to discern carefully the competencies that we will include on this column. And please remember that entries in this column should be aligned with the previous two columns, that is the content standard and the performance standards. Now let us take a closer look at the competencies. According to the science briefer, these standards are further represented as learning competencies, which are the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that our students need to demonstrate in every lesson or learning activity. It is important to note here that there should be an alignment between standards, competencies, and activities. Because teachers, the standards determine the competencies, and the competencies determine the activities. And the activities should be crafted in such a way that they will help develop the competencies, and the competencies are steps in order to achieve the standards. So there is a very deep bond among these three columns that we really need to study very well, discern, and take a look at. Now, to help us create a good learning competencies, we are given 5 characteristics. It is said in the MELCS that number 1, a good learning competency is aligned with national, state, and or local standards or frameworks. An example of which would be scientifically literate Filipinos. Second, it connects the content to higher concepts across the content area. So if you are teaching grade 7, you should not be just focused on grade 7, but you should have a relationship with the grade 6 and the grade 8. And in number 3, it is applicable to real life situation. This is very important, my dear teachers. The situations or our lessons should be applicable to real life situation. And number 4, if students left school after this grade, it would be important for them to have this competence above many others. So the competencies that we will be giving to them, the skills that we will be giving to them should be meaningful to them if they leave school, all right? And finally, number 5, it wouldn't be expected that most students would learn this through their parents or communities if not taught in school. So what are the characteristics of the most essential learning competencies? According to the briefer of MELCS, as the department anticipates the challenges in employing various schemes in the delivery of the learning standards due to COVID-19, the number of the identified essential learning competencies per quarter were further reduced. Thus, the term most essential learning competencies or MELCS. Maybe you're wondering, how much was reduced? Well, in the 2016 curriculum guide, there are actually 14,171 learning competencies in all the subjects. Now, with the advent of the MELCS, It was reduced to 5,689 learning competencies. Now, 40% of the original learning competencies, therefore, have been retained. And again, we need to keep in mind, the reason why this is done is because schools will now have staggered schedules, shortened class. Thus, DepEd came up with a statement. In determining the most essential learning competencies, the department collaborated with stakeholders from the Assessment, Curriculum and Technology Research Center, during which the descriptor endurance was considered the primary determining factor. A learning competency is enduring if it remains with the learners long after a test or a unit is completed, or if it is useful beyond a singular test or unit of study. Examples of these learning competencies would include research skill, reading comprehension, writing, map reading, and hypothesis testing. These are essential in many professions or in everyday life. So we have an article entitled Prioritizing Standards Using Real Criteria, written by Manny and Horrell. You may want to read this article in reference if you want to read further and to have a good grasp of the meaning of readiness, endurance, assessment, and leverage. The link is posted in this slide. Letter R would stand for readiness, E for endurance, A for assessment, and L for leverage. In this article, each of these concepts were discussed in detail. So I encourage you teachers to find time to read this article. Now moving on, when we have completed the column on competencies, we consider the following: the 2016 Curriculum Guide, the MELCs, considering the competencies based on real, that is readiness, endurance, assessment, and leverage. But what does the endurance concept really encompasses? What does it mean? It keeps on popping up in most of the documents from DepEd. It is actually, my dear teachers, referring to the transfer of learning to real life. Whatever they learn in school, they must be able to execute it in real life situations. And when we go to the certification assessment instrument, we are talking here in terms of the standards for the learning plan. It states a systematic and progressive development of student skills resulting in understanding and culminating in transfer of learning. Therefore, when we are deciding on which competencies to include in the curriculum map, as per the guidance of MELCs, we should be thinking about endurance and transfer of learning, which is also the same criterion in the certification of assessment instrument. Moving on, since transfer of learning to real life is emphasized in MELCs, how do we as teachers ensure its achievement in the curriculum design? The MELCs briefer suggests that in using the MELCs, we need to consider two things, teachers. First, we need to identify the MELCs to be used. And second of all, how do we use the competencies from the MELCs? And to consolidate the different ways of using MELCs, constantly we remind ourselves of the goal of ensuring endurance and transfer of learning. As mentioned in the different briefers, we need to, number one, unpack into sub-competencies or tasks. Number two, repeat it in another unit or in another grade level. Number 3, we follow up in higher grade levels. Number 4, we cluster with other competencies. And number 5, merge with other competencies and we rephrase them. Number 6, focus on the skill rather than the content. This is a big challenge nowadays, teachers, that we focus on the skill rather than the content. And given our situation, we can easily get lost in the delivery of number 6. So let's be careful with that. And then in number 7, and the most important of all the guidelines, is to align our competencies with the unit performance standards. So you have the performance standard with you today. Take a look at it and start thinking already, what are the probable competencies that we can use for the delivery of our music subject. I have here some examples. Most of them were lifted from our music curriculum guide and the MELCs. Okay, for number 1, unpack MELC into sub-competencies. This was lifted from grade 7, quarter 1. The unit topic is Music of Luzon Lowlands. Now, the learning competency reads, performs music from Luzon Lowlands with accompaniment. And under this, the sub-competencies that I have broken it into states. 1, improvises simple rhythmic or melodic accompaniments to selected music from the lowlands of Luzon. 2nd, explores ways of producing sounds on a variety of sources that is similar to the instruments being studied. And finally, sings folk song from the lowlands of Luzon. You see, teachers, improvising, exploring how to produce sound, and singing, they are all pointing towards performance. That's why we deemed it proper to put it as sub-competencies of the learning competency perform. For number 2, we repeat MELCs in another level for reinforcement. Well, in music, this is very evident. I have here an example from grade 7, quarter 3, grade 8, quarter 1, grade 9, quarter 2, grade 10, quarter 4, wherein in the MELCs, it is encouraged to develop the skills of performance or to perform. The only thing that differs are the subject matter or source. Like, for example, in grade 7, quarter 3, students are expected to perform music from Mindanao with their own accompaniment. But in grade 8, quarter 1, students will be performing music, but this time, sample music from Southeast Asia. And in grade 9, quarter 2, students will be asked to perform selected music from the classical period. And in grade 10, quarter 4, we perform excerpts from 20th or 21st century musical. Kaya po usually, di ba, at the end of the year, there is a musical play in your school, because these are the competencies that need to be accomplished as given in the curriculum guide and in the MELCs. Now, for the learning progression, I have here from grade 4, grade 5, grade 6. Hello po sa mga teachers ng grade 4, grade 5, and grade 6. In grade 4, the identification of the different notes and rest is given. Thus, when the students move to grade 5, it is assumed that the students have already mastered and they have already a good grasp of the different kinds of notes and rest. So a more important learning competency for grade 5 is to identify accurately the duration of notes and rest in duple, triple, and quadruple time signatures. And in grade 6, because it is understood that in grade 5 they have come across the simple time signatures, we are now ready to give them a new time signature, which is 6/8, and at the same time, the students can now create their own rhythmic pattern. Now, for clustering with other competencies, I got this from grade 9, quarter 1. It states in the learning competency, listens perceptibly to selected vocal and instrumental music of medieval, Renaissance, and Baroque music. And the second competency explains the performance practice, that is setting, composition, role of composer and performers, and audience during the medieval, Renaissance, and Baroque periods. And we cluster them together to identify a new MELCS that reads, listens perceptibly to selected vocal and instrumental music and explains the performance practice during the medieval, Renaissance, and Baroque periods. And in number 5, we can merge other competencies and we rephrase them. For example, in grade 8, quarter 4, in the CG, it is stated that students need to identify musical characteristic of selected Asian musical theater through video, films, or live performances. They are expected to describe the instruments that accompany kabuki, wayang kulit, and Peking opera, and describe how a specific idea or story is communicated through music in a particular Asian musical theater. So now when we merge them together, we are given the new MELCS, and it can be stated as discusses the different components in selected Asian musical theater. Same thing with grade 7, quarter 3. Okay, discovers way of producing sounds on a variety of sources that is similar to the instrument being studied, and improvises simple rhythmic or melodic accompaniments to selected music from Mindanao. When you go to the MELCS, it is performs music from Mindanao with own accompaniment. Now with the number 6 guideline, focus on the skill rather than content. In music, this is our primary goal, to develop the skill of performing. So it's either they will perform or demonstrate. But I highly encourage you teachers that we strengthen the skill on performing, whether it is playing an instrument on improvised means, whether it is singing, because this is the main skill that our subject should be developing in our students. And in number 7, we align it with the unit performance standard. Again, we don't have much of a problem here because it is already stated in our performance standard, and it is reiterated in the competencies given to us in MELCS. But please take note of this question as you discern the different competencies of the MELCS. Will this alignment lead to endurance or transfer? Will these competencies lead to transfer? We can refer back to the definition of endurance in the MELCS. I have here another example. Okay, are the standards aligned with the competencies? I have highlighted describe, analyzes, and identifies. Is it aligned with your performance standard that states performs music of lowlands with appropriate pitch, rhythm, expression, and style? If I use those 3 competencies, teachers, will I be able to complete the performance standard? Will it lead to endurance or transfer? Let's have another example. In this curriculum design, there is no statement of the content and performance standard. And I have here all the competencies written down along with the week number and the quarter. Do you think there is alignment of standards and competencies when there is no content and performance standards stated in the curriculum design? There are a number of units that we are faced with problems on alignments and problems of competencies leading to transfer. Given these gaps, how do we align the standards and competencies to ensure the transfer of learning? What process can be done? Now we focus on the concept of streamlining. I'll give you a moment. Take a look at your screen and tell me, what do we have on our screens? Teachers, these are streamlines. Welcome to Streamlining the Teaching and Learning of the K-12 curriculum. You have probably heard this word streamlining over and over again, but what does it really mean for us teachers and curriculum designers? We define streamline as a path traced by a massless particle moving with flow. Flow follows a particular direction. And according to engineers, there are two types of a flow. The laminar flow. It happens when fluid particles follow a smooth path in layers or laminae with each other, moving parallel to each other without mixing, and has visible streamline. On the other hand, turbulent flow happens when fluid particles move in rough path and there are cross currents mixing the layers, thus creating a swirling zone. I want you to keep those two types of flows, my dear teacher. Laminar flow and the turbulent flow. Similarly, in curriculum planning, we can produce either a laminar flow or a turbulent flow. Let's take an example from English curriculum. There is no specific starting point. They have no specific ending. One can start anywhere and you create your own flow. You determine that as a teacher. Now my question is this the kind of flow that you would like to do in your curriculum? Or you may opt for a design that is more desirable, which is the laminar flow. The flow from the unit topic to the standards, to the competencies, to the assessments, to the activities, and to the resources. The arrows on the screen determine the alignment of the different components of the curriculum map. Because, my dear teachers, streamlining is not simply reducing competencies. Rather, it is establishing alignments between standards, competencies, assessments, activities, and resources. Streamlining is aligning these columns for a smooth flow in the process of learning. As teachers, I'm sure, and you will be agreeing with me, we do not want our students' learning experience to be turbulent, right, teachers? Now, to help us, let me share with you the benefits of streamlining. First, there will be a clarity of process. And you as a teacher, your teaching will be efficient because it's well planned and you follow a particular flow. Then we can focus more on the skill, which is very important, and it has been reiterated over and over again. We can plan and we can determine the scaffold skills development from day one to the last day of the quarter. And there will be a clear evidence of learning in our students. So streamlining gives us a lot of reason to sit down, assess, discern, and plan for what we will do both horizontally and vertically. So these are the alignments that the certifiers will be looking for in the curriculum map, especially for those schools, private school participating in the e-recertification this year. This will be the guide or the instrument that the certifiers will be using. Now let's go back to our example, okay? And if we follow this kind of design in the unit, teachers, is this a laminar or a turbulent flow? You tell me. What about this quarter level design? Is it laminar or turbulent flow? Is it enough that we just have the competencies, all the competencies, but we don't have the guiding light of the content and the performance standards? Do you think we will be able to streamline our curriculum design? So you see, to ensure a laminar flow in our teaching design, there are two techniques in streamlining. In technique A, we will align content standards and competencies with the performance standard. And after doing technique A, we will do technique B, which is identifying power and supporting competencies in clustering this. Take a deep breath, teachers, because it is not a humongous task. We will do this together. So let's move on. Always remember that our goal is endurance or transfer of learning to real life. How can we as teachers and curriculum designer ensure that this goal is achieved by our learners? We align with the performance standard. For technique A, we can use this diagram to help us visualize how to align the content standard and the performance standard. What do you see in this diagram? What is at the top of that diagram? And in terms of the positioning of the standards, where is the content standard? And where is the performance standard? Have you ever asked yourself why the performance is on top rather than the content standard? Because our goal is transfer of learning and endurance. That's why in the topmost and in the middle, our goal is to transfer the learnings of our students. How do we go about this particular technique, technique A? We have 7 steps, and together, teachers, please join me as we walk through these 7 steps. Ready? Okay. Let us take a look at this example from grade 7, quarter 3. Do you think this type of design will enable our learners to acquire lifelong learning? Is this design an example of a laminar or a turbulent flow? Given these competencies, with the absence of the statement of the content standard and performance standard, how can we ensure that the learning of our students will be enduring? Let's go back to 2016 Curriculum Guide of Music, particularly grade 7, quarter 1. If we count the competencies for this quarter, we are given 10 learning competencies. You are given 10 learning competencies. By just that, by just presenting to you the 10 learning competencies from music, do you think you will be able to come up with a laminar or a turbulent flow? That's a thought to consider, my dear teachers. So how do we deal with the turbulence? How do we deal with the storm? First, we copy the content and performance standard and write the unit topic in the diagram. So please take note how it is placed on the diagram. And take note that we just copied the content standard and the performance standard along with the unit topic as written in the curriculum guide. Then we proceed to step 2, which is the unpacking of the transfer goal and performance standards, performance task rather, from the performance standard. In this example from grade 7, quarter 1, we have the performance standard, which is to perform music of the lowlands with appropriate pitch, rhythm, expression, and style. And this is further emphasized, developed in a transfer goal written as students on their own and in the long run will be able to perform vocal and instrumental music to promote the cultural identity of a region. And to further emphasize the transfer goal, this is to be realized with a performance task. I am hoping that most of you are already familiar and you have assimilated in your system the grasps, which I will not be discussing in detail today. So the grasp is written under the performance task. This is a short narration of what you expect your students to do in order to achieve the transfer goal and eventually achieve the performance standard for that quarter. In the diagram, it would look like this. So you have a corresponding box for each of the components discussed in the previous slide. And moving on to step number 3, let us review the DepEd curriculum guide in 2016, your school curriculum map, and take out competencies that are not directly aligned with the performance standard. The competencies marked with the red X are the competencies taken out of the original curriculum guide. We're using here quarter 1 still of grade 7, and upon checking, these are the competencies that were taken out from the original curriculum guide. In music, 4 competencies were discarded. However, the number 7 competency, which reads, sings folk songs from lowland Luzon, it is an important competency in realizing the performance standards. Thus, it was marked with a circle to note that we need this competency and that we need to reinstate this competency in relation to the MELCs. Therefore, after eliminating the competencies that do not connect with the realization of the performance standard, we music teachers are left with 7 most essential competencies. However, as I have pointed out in the previous slide, we need to reinstate 1 competency, which is the singing part. Thus, we came up with the 7 competencies plus 1 for grade 7, quarter 1. After identifying the most essential learning competencies, we now apply step number 4, which is to classify the competencies in terms of A, M, T learning goals. Teachers, quick review. A stands for acquisition, M stands for making meaning, and T stands for transfer. Competencies marked with the red A and M are marked under content standards. Now, maybe you're just wondering, let's have a quick look back. What are the learning goals for acquisition, for the making meaning, and the standards? So just for reference, this is your chart for these 3 learning goals. Meanwhile, the competencies marked with the red letter T should match the stated performance standard. because our performance standard here states that the learner performs music of the lowlands with appropriate pitch, rhythm, expression, and style. Thus, the following: the exploring ways to produce sound, the improvising of simple rhythmic pattern and melodic accompaniments, the singing of folk song of lowland Luzon, and the performing of music from lowland are competencies that would lead us to transfer. And when we reflect this on the diagram, it should look like this. And after completing step number 4, we are now ready to do step 5, which is to unpack the EQ and the EU. Teachers, do we still remember that? I certainly hope so. With the cluster of M, competencies, and establish link with the content standard and the performance task. And in step 6 is to cluster the competencies marked with A and establish a link with the content standard and performance standard. Take a look, teachers, of this diagram, and you have now a vision of where things are placed and how they are connected with one another. Now, finally, in step 7, we can now determine the assessment for acquisition, which are the quarterly assessment types, and for the letter M, which are the written work type that you give to your students. Tell me now, teachers, with this presentation, the standards and the competency, is this an example of a laminar or a turbulent flow? Compare this with the previous slide. Is this an example of a laminar or a turbulent flow? So are you now convinced that putting it in a diagram gives it more sense, gives it more direction, and it puts your heart at peace rather than going in blind, just using the competencies without the statement of the content and the performance standard? After having done your technique A, do we end there? Most certainly not, teachers. Our job is not yet finished. It is a continuing process. It is a flowing process. So in technique B, we identify power and supporting competencies, and we can cluster them together. Now, just for review or for emphasis, power standards are the most essential standards for students to master the most critical outcomes of their learning experience. Power standards are key learnings that will prepare students for the next grade level. Teachers design their lessons to teach the skills and knowledge that students need to master the priority standards. Students are graded through assessments of their skills of each of the power standards. Moving on, power competencies refer to curricular competencies that are directly achieved the performance standard and pass all the real criteria. Let's review, teacher. Real, readiness, endurance, assessment, and leverage. But what are the supporting competencies? These are the curricular competencies which contribute to or serve as a step in attaining the power competencies. I have here an example from the other subjects, and check. Let us compare the ones on column 1 and column 2 as against the readiness, endurance, assessment, or leverage. Which is a power competency and which are the supporting competencies? In determining which competency is the power competency, we may also take into consideration this question. Which of these give the purpose of the competency? That's why the competencies on column 2 have been highlighted. This gives the purpose of the competency. And how can we identify and cluster power competencies to streamline for our curriculum design for this school year? Now, in streamlining, we will be using the following. We identify the power and supporting competencies using real from core sets of competencies. We cluster the power and supporting competencies. We sequence cluster in the last related to the performance task. And we have to set a budget of time for teaching the clusters. So let's move on to technique B, my dear teachers, the identifying the unit power and supporting competencies using real. So in the succeeding slides, you will be given an overview of what each of these letters stand for. When you say readiness, the competency represents learning that is essential for success in a new unit, course study, or succeeding grade level. It has readiness. For endurance, the competency represents learning that goes beyond one course or grade level and is representative of the concept or skill that is important in life. Then you say that competency has endurance. For letter A, which is assessment, when the competency is often tested in an achievement or admission exam or for a job, okay, then it has a value for assessment. So we know very well that during the duration of their stay in high school, students have the National Achievement Test, okay, they take entrance exam for UP, UST, and all the other schools. So if the competency is tested as against these tests, then it has a value for assessment. And finally, for leverage, we say that a competency has leverage when it represents learning that is applied both within the content area and in the other content areas. See, for example, you can integrate with another subject like English. You can integrate music, not just in the MAPE zone, but in, say, for example, in English and Filipino. Then if you can integrate with that, then your competency has a leverage. So how do we do this now? The identifying the unit power and supporting competencies with real. So I am giving you the table that would include the competencies, and then another column for letter R, which is, remember, that is needed for the next unit or grade. Letter E, is it needed for real life, or does it lead to real life situations? For letter A, is it needed for the achievement or admission or job test? And for letter L, can you integrate it, or can you have a relationship with other subjects? Then therefore, at the last column, you can now identify if that competency that you have written on the first column is an example of a power or a supporting competency. I have here an example for you from music, from grade 7 again, quarter 1. And we have identified which ones are past the checklist for letter R, letter E, letter A, and letter L. Thus, we came up with the power competencies that reads: performs music from Luzon Lowlands with own accompaniment. Thereafter, we cluster and identify the budget of time for the power and supporting competencies. Here, let me give you an example, teachers. Okay. So we stick with what we have used previously for Music 7, Quarter 7. Our power competency is performs music from Luzon Lowlands with own accompaniment. The supporting competencies are written on the rightmost column. Now, for describe the musical characteristic representative of music selections from Lowlands of Luzon after listening, analyzes the musical elements of lowland vocal and instrumental music selections, and identifies the musical instruments and other sound sources from the lowlands of Luzon. If you notice, this more or less complies with the content standards. That's why we just suggested 2 days of discussion in the realization of these 3 competencies. However, when you go to explore, improvising, and singing of the folk song from Lowland Luzon, we suggested 4 days because this will help the students during their practice or rehearsals to develop further the skills. Thus, we gave them more time to complete these skills. And then the evaluation of music and music performance, usually this comes after the performance task. So we will give the students only 1 day to do that. Music 7 Quarter 1 has 8 competencies to be delivered in 7 to 8 weeks. Now, when doing the budget of time for music, we may have to consider the school's position on how many times music classes will be conducted, especially now during our online distance learning. So things will be changing a little bit. The important thing to keep in mind is to maintain the alignment with the performance standard. We streamline, we reduce, but we remain aligned with the performance standard. So for budgeting, it is very important that you get in touch with your school heads and on how to go about it, because you will need to determine how many days are you going to divide the competencies that you have planned for 1 quarter. And also take into consideration, my dear teachers, that you will not have any face-to-face contact with your students. Now, after doing the competencies, the last 2 components of the curriculum map, the assessment, activities, resources, along with the institutional core values, have to be provided by you teachers. Okay? Please take note that this will not be given to you in the curriculum guide or in the MELCs. So this will be our new way of mapping the assessment and competencies. We now have to consider activities that the students will be doing offline, meaning on their own, and the activities that they will be doing online. Therefore, you have to provide for the web links that the students will be using in attaining your power competencies and the supporting competencies. I have here an example still from grade 7, quarter 1. So you have there the cluster number and the number of days, the power competencies, the supporting competencies, assessment, and the PEAC learning module activity and materials from 2018 or 2019, you may refer to it, and the institutional core values. And since the learning modules from PEAC is now available online, you may identify the activities that you will use with the corresponding page and link. And if you notice, teachers, we only used one power competencies for music in 1 quarter for the simple reasons that we have limited class time with them. Even when we were in the previous normal or the former normal, usually we only identify one power competencies because we are a once a week class. So do not be too hard on yourself, music teachers. I know it's challenging, but there's always a way around it, believe me. And try to browse these examples. And when we prepare for our own mapping, when you do this after eating lunch today, please always remember that there should be a vertical and a horizontal alignment, all of which will be leading to transfer. So, by this time, my dear teachers, you already have a complete sample of a diary curriculum map. And as we always say, there should be vertical and horizontal alignment. So please check the teachers from left to right of your table, and then from top to bottom of your column on competencies. They should be aligned. There should be a reason why you are putting that particular competency on that portion. It's not just simply copying it, lifting it directly from the curriculum guide or the MELCs. There should be a reason. There should be a story behind why you are doing that. And when you do your assessment, it should be reflected that before doing the assessment, it has been covered by the competencies that you have given. And this is further reiterated, strengthened by the activities that you will be giving your students. Alignment is very important because it always comes out, especially in the PEAC certification assessment instrument. It is very important because it gives us a laminar flow to everything that we are doing, teachers. Do you really want to do a turbulent flow, teachers, where everything is all over the place? Or would you rather have things placed rightfully one after the other with a good reason? Think about it, teachers. And now here we have, after mapping the competency and identifying the budget of time, we can now calendar the activities. This is an example of a unit calendar showing when the different competencies with the corresponding assessment or activities will have to be done. It is also important to state whether the activity will be done online or offline. Now, in the case of music, we can perhaps give the calendar for the entire quarter, since our class time is only once a week. So as to give our students, and especially this year, the parents who will be supporting our students, who will be aiding our students in learning from their homes, it is very, very important for them to see the progression of the lesson and the budget of time. How many days or how many weeks are the students expected to develop the skill in singing or to develop a skill in creating rhythmic patterns? Okay, and essentially, teachers, please do not be threatened by the calendar, right? Because all entries in this calendar will just come from the curriculum map. Therefore, if your curriculum map is done with a laminar flow, then it will make the learning smooth and engaging to our students. Because in summary, my dear teachers, the task we are now facing is to prepare the curriculum map based on the 2016 curriculum guide and the DepEd MELCs matrix. with consideration to the PEAC certification assessment instrument. And we make sure that there is alignment, and this can be done smoothly and with peace of your heart and mind if you use a curriculum map in your curriculum design. Because from the unit topic, from the content standards, from the performance standards, along with the competencies, using the assessment, the activities, and the resources provided by the subject teacher, we music teachers, and the school's vision mission, there should be an alignment, because our ultimate goal is to have the skills, enduring skills for work and for life in the 21st century. And how do we ensure that? The MELCS has given us these guidelines, the 7 guidelines, and I cannot I have to reiterate that number 7 is very important in achieving the enduring learnings, the enduring skills, and the transfer of learning for our students. Number 7, the alignment with performance standard is very, very important, my dear teachers rather. And then we can use streamlining for endurance and transfer. That is, we apply technique A, the aligning of the content standard and competencies with the performance standards. Thereafter, we identify the power and supporting competencies and clustering them together depending on our needs. So teachers, although our task at hand may look humongous, if we sit down, take a look at it one at a time, consider the important points that have been discussed today in this webinar, I guess we will be able to do this one step at a time, hand in hand, because now more than ever, we teachers will need to collaborate with one another, help one another, whether we are in Luzon, whether you are in Visayas, whether you are in Mindanao. Because as Jack Ma said, never give up. Today is hard. I know that, teacher. It's very hard. But tomorrow will be worse. Mind you. But the day after tomorrow will be sunshine. So with that, thank you so much, teachers, for joining me today in this webinar with PEAC. And I hope to see you in the future. And I hope I was able to more or less show you the path with a light as we go about school year 2020-2021. The future is in our hands, teachers. Good luck and God bless to all of you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Joy, for your very clear and comprehensive sharing. We do have a few questions though. Okay, our first question is, if students cannot go to school because of the pandemic and they don't have any musical instrument at home, how will teachers help them learn and develop skills in music? Should we not just focus on content and appreciation of music?
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. Teachers, now more than ever, is a good time to develop the performing skills of our students. If you check the MELCS for music, one of the supporting competencies is the exploration of how to produce sounds. We can ask our students to do improvisation of the sounds that is available at home. You know, let's go back to how we do it in elementary, where you have the ice cream tub and you will put a cover, and that will be used by our students for creating rhythmic patterns. If there are no melodic instruments, our voice is the best example of an instrument that we can use, because as what I have always reiterated and shared with the teachers during the inset, our voice, every human being has a singing capacity. This is our chance, teachers, because for so long at times singing has been derogated. Parang ayaw ng mga batang kumanta. They would just rather focus on the content. Now, here is our chance. This is a very good opportunity for us. Use your voice. Develop the singing skills of the kids habang nasa bahay. Remember, teachers, what is the first element that saved us when we were locked down back in March? The concerts that were produced online on Facebook. So there is no reason for us to just focus on the content. Now is a good time for us to emphasize the performance skills of our students.
Thank you, ma'am. Now here's another question. How can we transition from the usual way of teaching music to blended learning, which we should probably be doing for a year or two now?
From the transition from blended learning, okay, to going to the face-to-face will have to be discerned by the teacher step by step. It is not a jump, because for the moment, teachers, we are actually limited to the online course learning. Now, eventually, if we transition to the blended learning, if the students at home were able to grasp the skills that they need, by the time they go back to schools where there are the instruments, where you have the things that are commonly used in music, then that is the time that the students can apply. But it also does not mean that they will not do it at home. Okay, so it's two things. You can do it at home and eventually experience playing the instrument when they go back to school, whenever that will be, because the instruments will just be there in schools waiting for the students. We cannot focus that, no, let's just do the content, whole note, quarter note. But when they see the instrument, they will just look at the instrument. It's not enough that they know, oh, that's a drum, that is a cymbal. By that time, they should be engaged. Oh, this is what I used to do at home, but I was just using the ice cream tub. Now I can use it in a real drum. So the transition is actually very clear. Okay, nandun siya, but we have to prepare them on this level. Let's focus now. Eventually, para yang, sabi nga, it's a laminar flow. It will happen when the time comes.
Okay, thank you again, ma'am. But for the last question, in assessing our students, how do we make sure that the students were the ones who did or answered their work and not their parents?
Yeah. That was the very first challenge of every teacher when online distance learning was announced. And I'm sure all of you are having a difficult time already thinking, how do we ensure that they will not be copying from one another? Now, for the content, the usual quiz nyo and everything, you can use applications, and in the applications, you can choose that you will randomize the questions, all right? So that students will not be able to compare their answers with one another, because really that is one of our difficult points at this point, yung paano hindi magkokopyahan ang mga bata. But for us music teachers, more than the content, and I have been emphasizing this over the last 2 hours, let us focus on the skill. Alam niyo yun, we laugh at the TikTok, all right, teachers, but that is a clear evidence of what the students are doing. But please, I am not suggesting that you use TikTok. Now in the comforts of the home, the kids can now perform. maalam na mag-video ang mga bata, they can upload. So I don't think that would be a problem. It's just that you can say, for example, if you're asking them to sing a song from Lowland Luzon, perhaps for a particular week, you can just ask them to sing 1 or 2 lines and then ask them to upload to whatever platform, learning platform your school will be using. And then progressively, you ask them to sing it completely, and then maybe in another week, 2 weeks or 2, maybe you can ask the student already to accompany it with a clapping. So yung pag-video ng sarili nila will have a deeper meaning, a more meaningful meaning, kasi it is done for the educational purpose.
So sure po tayo na ang bata talaga ang gumagawa at
Yes,
hindi ang magulang.
Correct po. Siyempre naman, nakakatawa naman po kung si Mami.
Yes.
Pero siguro pwede kung gusto si Mami sumama sa video, baka pwede rin naman. Pero at least yon, the evidence is very clear. Whoever is the learner will video themselves and upload it to the learning platform that your school will be using. I just have one concern, teachers, please do not ask your students to submit or to post their videos on Facebook, on social media. Okay, I'm sure your schools have learning platforms. Please use them. Okay. Now, kung gusto ng bata, very proud yung bata na i-share niya sa Facebook yon, that's on their own. But for the educational purpose, please ask them to either email it to you or to use the learning platforms that will be submitted.
Okay. Again, thank you very much, Ms. Joy, for joining us today.
Thank you, Ms. Mai.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, of course, to our viewers. And we hope that you have learned something valuable from our webinar today. Coming up this afternoon, we hope to see you on our webinar for PE from 1 to 3 p.m. and TLE, Home Economics, at 3 to 5 p.m. And thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.